The smarter you get, the quieter your phone becomes. Not because you changed, but because you stopped being easy to manage. You started seeing the games people play, the guilt-wrapped requests, the fake vulnerability, the emotional bookkeeping they call friendship. And they felt it. Because when you become intelligent, not just in thought, but in perception, you become dangerous, not loud, not cruel, just clear. And clarity threatens people who survive on confusion. But that's not the real reason they pulled away. That part is darker, and most people never notice it. So they start pulling away, saying you're distant, cold, hard to connect with. But what they really mean is, you stopped being emotionally profitable. You no longer perform your own dismissal, just to keep them comfortable. You no longer entertain their projections just to avoid abandonment. And so they leave. That's the lie no one tells you. You don't lose friends when you get smarter. You lose access points for people who needed you to stay small. Because intelligence isn't just awareness. It's refusal. Refusal to play roles. Refusal to soothe egos. Refusal to fake resonance where there is none. Now here's where it gets brutal. This isn't just about social circles. It's about the collapse of the person you had to be just to survive them. And the more intelligent you become, the more invisible you feel. Because you're not hard to love. You're hard to use. You're not too intense. You're too accurate. You're not closed off. You're done playing therapist to people who call it friendship. But we haven't hit the core yet. The real fracture lives deeper. And it's about to surface. Here's the twist. The silence you fear isn't loneliness, it's detox. The sound of your nervous system releasing the grip of conditional affection. You're not failing socially. You're withdrawing energetically from a world that never met you, only mirrored you. And the truth is, you never lacked connection. You just had too many people around you who confused attachment with intimacy. And now that they're gone, what's left? Silence. Yes. But also something else. Something older. Something sacred. And if you stay with it, it will show you a power you forgot you had. You were never excluded. You were extracted. And what rises next will finally show you why. You say you're fine, but your jaw is locked. Your shoulders don't drop. You scan every room like a soldier returning from a war you were born into. You're not calm. You're coiled. You're compressed. You don't talk much. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you've learned that speaking honestly tends to make people disappear. So you keep it short, keep it safe, keep it acceptable. But inside, you're narrating everything. Monitoring tone, timing, facial reactions, energetic shifts. Every compliment, suspect. Every silence, a warning. Every pause, a calculation. You call this self-awareness. But what if it's not? What if your intelligence is just trauma that learned how to disappear beautifully, not insight? But armor passed off as perception. You didn't learn to read people. You learned to scan for threat in the shape of a smile. Not because you're gifted, but because being unprepared once cost you safety. So now you prepare for everything. You walk into rooms already halfway out. You tell jokes you don't find funny. You nod when you disagree, and no one sees the performance because you've made it flawless. But that's the curse, isn't it? You've built a personality so functional that no one thinks to check if it's a disguise. You apologize too much. Not for things you did, but for existing in ways that might inconvenience someone. You text back with smiley faces you don't feel. You say no worries when you're unraveling inside. You explain yourself before anyone even asks. That's not kindness. That's preemptive self-erasure, a way to stay in the room by vanishing before anyone can push you out. You've been praised for your calm, your insight, your ability to stay composed while others collapse. but they don't see what it costs. They don't feel the aftershock, the migraines, the insomnia, the emotional hangover from having to compress your truth for another day. They don't see how often you leave conversations wondering if you said too much or if the silence you offered was interpreted as weakness. You call it control. But control isn't strength. It's a symptom, a velvet cage, soft to the world, sharp on the inside. But this isn't about control anymore. This is about erosion, and you've been eroding for years. Quietly, elegantly, invisibly, you were taught to regulate emotions. What you actually learned was how to store them in your jaw, in your stomach, in your muscles, until they calcified into identity, in your neck, in your gut, in your muscles, until they stiffened into identity, and now you don't even know what's yours anymore. But what if I told you the fracture isn't even yours? It started long before you had language, before your nervous system knew the word self. The smiles rehearsed, the tone trimmed for safety, the personality curated like a product no one asked for, but everyone demanded. You're not hiding who you are. You're hiding the fact that you don't remember what that even means, because intelligence without healing becomes a survival algorithm. It predicts rejection, calculates betrayal, anticipates abandonment, and calls that wisdom. But it's not wisdom, it's residue, the scar tissue of a mind that got too good at building exits. Here's the part you haven't admitted yet. You feel safest when no one is close, because close has never meant connection. It has meant obligation, emotional labor, surveillance, and even now, as you hear this, you're analyzing every word, not to understand, but to protect. Your intelligence was forged in exile, and now you don't know how to exist without it. But let me ask you something. When was the last time you told the full truth in real time? When was the last time you sat in silence and felt nothing to prove? When was the last time someone saw your mind and didn't flinch? You're not emotionally strong, you're emotionally rehearsed. You've mistaken compression for composure and silence for mastery. But what if I told you that stillness you wear like armor is where the wound is buried? Because beneath all of this, the scanning, the apology, the calm, isn't just pain. It's something older, a fracture, a betrayal, not loud, not cinematic, an ancient wound, inherited in silence and mistaken as identity. One you've spent your whole life trying to solve with intelligence. But what comes next won't explain it. It'll expose it, because no one ever asked who you had to stop being just to stay alive in the room. They only praised how well you adapted, but you didn't adapt. You dismembered yourself, quietly, until what remained was acceptable. Intelligence wasn't your gift, it was your shield. You didn't develop it to see more, you developed it to be hurt less. You learned the language of people who confuse politeness with peace. You smiled with lips that wanted to scream. You nodded with a soul that already knew the answer. They called you observant, but you were never observing. You were anticipating, bracing, calculating escape routes no one else saw, because you understood something long before words arrived. The herd doesn't protect the different. It isolates them. Or worse, it feeds on them. So you stayed close enough to be safe, but far enough to stay invisible. And it worked. Too well. Because eventually, the act became identity, and the silence became you. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask worn to survive the theater of social life. At first, it felt like armor, but over time, it felt like absence, a quiet vanishing of self, one edit at a time, until no one questioned the performance, not even you. But beneath every persona is the shadow, the exile, the unwanted, the truths that were too raw to be welcomed, so they were buried, not dead, just waiting. Your intensity, your rage, your craving to be seen without translation, they still live there, clawing behind the smile, bleeding through the mask. Every time you leave a conversation, feeling smaller, that's not anxiety. That's your shadow whispering, "This isn't me." But you've grown fluent in survival. You think performance is connection. You think composure is mastery. You think silence means strength, but all it means is that you've become hard to hear, even by yourself. You project abandonment, but never ask why you abandoned yourself first. You blame the coldness of others, but never look at the walls you've decorated with politeness. You say no one understands you, but you haven't offered anything real to be understood. Nietzsche called it herd morality, the quiet obedience we mistake for belonging. You learned how to stay small without being told, how to become digestible, how to disappear beautifully. But the deeper tragedy is this. You built a mask so perfect that now no one knocks. And in that silence, you think you've been rejected, but you haven't. You've been unreadable. And unreadability is the curse of those who perform too well. You were not born to echo, you were born to rupture. But rupture requires exile, and exile requires the death of the person you pretended to be. Jung called this the path of the self, not the self you advertise, the self that speaks in symbols, in dreams, in grief, the self that doesn't want to be liked, only to be whole. But here's where the ritual begins. To find that self, you must betray everything that was built to be loved. You must become intolerable to the very systems that rewarded your silence. And it won't feel holy. It will feel like failure, like forgetting how to speak their language, like watching every table you once belonged to vanished. But this is the truth. What you call loneliness is your original frequency returning, and when it returns, you'll feel it in your spine, not as inspiration, as rupture. The ego will panic, the mask will tighten, the need to explain will rise like a scream. Let it. You're not dying, you're molting, because every version of you that was tolerated was starving, and now you're done eating silence. So let them call you too much, too distant, too complex. Let them call you what they need to keep their illusions intact, because what's coming next, what you are becoming, cannot be consumed by the herd. You are not being excluded, you are being retrieved. And what we confront now isn't the mask. It's the one who kept wearing it long after remembering who they were beneath it. Then comes the silence, the ritual hush. After the collapse, after the mask shatters, after the chairs are empty and the roles have dissolved, nothing moves, and that terrifies you, because you think silence means failure. You think absence means you're broken. You think stillness is just loneliness without noise. But that's not what's happening. This isn't abandonment. This is return. You're not losing people. You're losing access to the roles you played to keep them. What you feel is not isolation. It's unbinding. The gravitational pull of performance is releasing. And now the quiet arrives. Let it. Because what lives on the other side of silence is not despair, it's clarity. A clarity that doesn't speak in words, but in weight, in presence, in the absence of urgency. This is what it means to integrate. You stop reacting, not because you've become indifferent, but because the parts of you that used to panic have nothing left to defend. You don't need to fix the perception anymore. You don't need to earn space with apology. You don't need to audition for love. There is no performance here, only recognition. You were never too much. You were just too whole to fragment believably. The pain didn't leave. It just changed shape. It stopped screaming and started humming. Like a compass, and every time you feel it, you don't collapse. You listen. That is integration, not escape, but quiet proximity to the wound without identifying as it. You let it be there, without trying to fix it, prove it, or weaponize it. And it begins to soften, not because you healed it, but because you stopped making it wrong. Power returns in silence, not in dominance, not in being right, not in being seen, but in the withdrawal of leaking energy into things that cannot meet you. You no longer enter rooms to be liked. You enter them to be real. And when real is too much, you leave, not to punish, but to protect your own frequency. Detachment is not coldness. It's remembering that you don't have to drink poison just because you're thirsty. You no longer chase. You allow. You observe. You remain. And in that stillness, something ancient starts to return. Not the performance, not the persona, but the presence, the weight of your own inner authority re-inhabiting your body. No longer asking for permission, no longer explaining itself. Just there. Undeniable. Unshakable. This is not the self you perform. It is the self that watches, waits, withdraws. It doesn't speak to be heard. It speaks to be true. And now, for the first time, your solitude isn't empty. It's sovereign, because integration isn't becoming someone new. It's becoming someone fewer people can access. And the final illusion that you needed to be understood to be whole begins to die silently, beautifully. What comes next is no longer about repair. It's about remembering what power feels like when you stop leaking it. You are not where you were. You are not who you were, but you still wear the echoes, like ghost clothing. It's okay. Shedding takes time, and sometimes the soul grows slower than the mask dissolves. Let it be slow. This isn't a victory arc. This is a return to the one you were before you had to explain everything, to the one who didn't adjust her volume just to be tolerated, to the one who didn't curate their soul to fit inside someone else's bandwidth. You're not becoming, you're remembering. The ache you feel now is not longing, it's spaciousness. You've unhooked from people who could only love you in fragments. You've withdrawn from the echo chambers that taught you your depth was dangerous. You've stopped auditioning, and now there is only silence. And from that silence, something speaks, not with language, not with logic, with gravity. You feel it in your spine, in your breath, in the rooms you no longer enter, in the people who no longer reach. This is not loss, this is recalibration. Because here is the truth you forgot. You are not meant to be accessible to everyone. You are not meant to be understood by most. Your intelligence is not a performance. It is a frequency. And some simply can't hold it without shattering. Let them shatter. The ones who leave when you stop explaining yourself were never listening. They were feeding, and now they're gone. Leave them gone. You do not owe your presence to the rooms that diluted it. You do not owe your softness to the hands that only touched you when you were quiet. You do not owe your gifts to a world that called them too much. What you owe is silence. To sit in yourself until the noise burns off. To listen not for answers, but for truth. To hold your own gaze until the parts of you that begged to be chosen realize they were never abandoned, just buried. This is not healing. This is re-inhabitation, a return of the breath, the weight, the inner animal that never stopped watching, even while you performed. You don't need to explain your solitude. You don't need to defend your quiet. You don't need to decorate your boundaries so they look like kindness. They're not kindness, they're architecture. You are not available for everything anymore. That is power. So when they ask why you're alone, why you're distant, why you've changed, don't answer. Just smile and keep walking. Because some truths are too sacred to waste on the forgetful. You are not lonely, you are rooted. You are not difficult, you are precise. You are not too much. you are finally intact. This is what it means to be intelligent in a world that confuses compliance with love. It means leaving the feast when you realize you were the meal. It means exiling yourself until the only voice you respond to is your own. No one will clap for this, but one day you will sit in your own presence and finally feel what everyone else ran from. And when that day comes, you won't call it loneliness anymore. You'll call it arrival. Don't explain yourself. Just leave a comment with one word: seen. If this cracked something open, not for likes, not for attention, but as proof to yourself that you're still in there, still whole, still watching. And if this felt like exposure, wait until the next video, the one that reveals why the things you thought were flaws, the quirks you camouflage, the habits you hide, were never dysfunction. They were intelligence in disguise. Click it if you're ready to see how much of your power you've mistaken for problems.